Hi everyone and welcome back to Scale Studio. Today we're going to finish the tiger with dust and mud and some grease effects. Also, we're going to finish the shell impacts that riddle this poor beast. Unfortunately, I did say that the tracks would be its own tutorial, but all the video I took for it was lost, so sadly the track tutorial is not going to be released. But before we start, I have a special announcement. Over the past few months, I've been building up a Patreon page. If you would like to support the channel, please check it out, as I offer goodies from frequent workbench updates to early access videos. Some of the highest tiers have perks like Patreon-only videos and different file downloads for 3D printers. The whole thing is customizable with $1, $5, $10, $15, and $20 pledges. You can choose the perks you want. Any pledge is super helpful, and any pledge made now to the end of September will also get early access to a video scheduled to release in several months. Well, with that out of the way, let's get started. Today we'll be using these ingredients for our mud effects: sifted dirt and potting soil, clay pastels, oil paints, and my own ground clay pastel powder, which doubles as a pigment. We'll be using this selection of oil paints for our effects. I used some burnt umber, yellow sienna, and titanium white to create a dusty oil paint mixture, and then I applied it randomly and some in streaks to create some streaking effects and then just random dusty effects. I then blended it with mineral spirits, and you can see that it takes quite a bit of refining, but the result is worth it in the end. Once it's dry, a cotton swab can help blur out hard edges and make the final result look a lot more convincing. After that, I'm going to apply the same mixture fairly liberally over the top of the turret sides. Then all I have to do is drag it down with a wide flat brush to create some really nice streaking effects. Then I'll go around and do the same on all vertical surfaces to make sure that it looks uniform and convincing. I used a little bit of burnt umber here just to give it a little bit of variance and make it look more like dirt, because I saw in a couple pictures when I was looking for reference material that this front plate actually got super dirty and super muddy, so I'm planning on replicating that in this model. The trick to this technique is not to use too much mineral spirits and to take your time. Make sure it's not too heavy, but also not too subtle, as you'll lose the effect. I'm now going to start pre-dusting, so I'm going to mask off any areas that I don't want to get the airbrush overspray onto. This includes the upper surfaces of the fenders and some other parts like that. Then I'm going to airbrush a similar color to the oil paint that we used before onto all surfaces that I think would be dusty or dirty. The main thing to remember here is that this is just a foundation. Don't overdo it or it's going to look bad. Once that's done, I'm going to take some sawdust, sifted dirt, some vallejo varnish, you can use any varnish, it doesn't really matter, and then some tap water, and I'm going to mix it all together to make sure I have the right consistency. After that, I'm going to start adding different colors to make sure that I can match it as closely as possible to the base dust mixes that we've made from oil and acrylic paints now. I'm going to start by applying it to the road wheels, and I'm going to make sure that each road wheel going back has more than the one before it. I feel like this would make sense, as more would accumulate in the rear as it's pushed back further. Then I'm going to blend it with water and move on to the outside road wheels. Now I'm going to make sure that the grease filler tube is full of mud, because this makes sense to me, as it would get chock full as the tank moved along. After that, I'm going to apply those chalk pastel pigments, and this just gives it a bit of a dry earth texture and adds some more fine texture to it, less of the big chunky stuff and more little dust particles. As you can see, it really does that well. I'm then going to add a dark mud mix that I made. Now this doubles as wet earth and leaking grease. So it's a little bit dark, and it's going to work to be the grease that was dissipated through the dirt as the tank leaked, but also as wet earth near the center of the wheel. I'm also going to add a little bit of gloss varnish to simulate wet dirt. After that, I'm going to go in with some diluted oil paints and apply them in streaks around the wheels, like grease that leaked out and then was spun out by the centrifuge that the wheels created as they moved along. I'll then blend that into the dirt we already made with some mineral spirits. I'm then going to start applying the mud mixture to the tracks. Now I don't want it on the upper surfaces as these will be polished by the tracks moving along the ground, but I also want to make sure that the inner cleats are completely filled with mud. After that, I'll dry brush the contact points with gray to prime it for polished metal. To simulate polished metal, I'm going to use this graphite stick and rub it along each contact point. You can see it really makes a nice polished effect. Make sure that you protect your hand with a paper towel or something because the graphite will get everywhere and ruin your model. After that, I'll add some speckling to the lower surfaces, like it drove through a puddle and maybe the track splashed it up, or it was flung up by the tracks. Then I'll apply a little bit more mud in places that make sense or you've seen in reference photos, like the front plate like I already mentioned, and drawing it down like the rain would have done. I'll then put Vallejo orange brown, orange rust, silver, and light rust on my wet palette that I made. I'll start with light rust as it provides a good neutral base coat for the shell impacts. From there, I'll use some German camo black brown to highlight protrusions and the outside edges that would have rusted faster and so gotten darker quicker. After that, I'm going to use very thin down orange rust to blend the two colors together, almost like an oil filter. I'll then add some orange brown to provide some random variation to the shell impact craters. Then I'll use the silver like I did the base gray on the tracks to highlight certain areas and prep the shell impacts for graphite polishing. After that, I'll make some streak with burnt umber oil paints, as you can see, making a very thick streak, and then cleaning it up with some mineral spirits. I'll then repeat the process for the shell impacts on the hull. Once all that's done and dry, I'll use the graphite stick to carefully polish some of the edges and even some of the insides of the shell impacts. I decided to randomly choose some that would be fresher and some that would be worse, and make the ones that were fresher be more polished and the ones that were worse to be more rotted out. And with that, we're done, and the first season of Scale Studio comes to a close. Thank you guys so much for your support and encouraging comments in my videos. It really made my first encounter with YouTube a good one. Now, if you were a patron, you would know what next series will be, but trust me when I say that it'll be great. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this far, and if you liked the content, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I release more from the studio. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by leaving a like and shoot me any questions you might have down below. If you'd like to support the channel, please check out my Patreon page, as it helps me out immensely and you can get some awesome perks in return. But that's all I have today, so I'll see you next time. Studio out.